the strange visitor in the snow. The wind howled like a living thing that morning. It swept down from the mountains, sharp as knives, curling under doorways and between the cracks of old wooden cabins. In the small Montana town of Elk Ridge, few people stirred before noon during the dead of winter. But Tom Walker had already been out for hours. Tom was a man of habit. 40 years old, lean and broad-shouldered, with a sun-worn face and quiet eyes that had seen too many winters. He lived alone in a log cabin that stood at the edge of the pine woods, too far for most folks, just right for him. A widower with no children of his own, he found peace in the rhythm of nature, chopping wood, checking his trail cameras, feeding the birds that somehow endured the cold. But that morning, something wasn't right. As he trudged through the knee-deep snow toward the tree line, he paused near a small rise where he kept a trail cam fastened to a fir. He bent to brush away the new snow, when something odd caught his eye, a set of tracks. Not deer. Not coyote. Too small for a full-grown bear. And too fresh. The prints led away from the trail and down into a gully. Tom followed, boots crunching, breath misting in front of him. He knew better than to follow unknown tracks blindly in winter, but something gnawed at him, something that felt like instinct. At the bottom of the gully, the forest thickened. Branches bent low under snow. Silence hung in the air, broken only by the whisper of wind. Then, he saw it. Slumped at the base of a snow-covered log, half buried in frost and pine needles, was a small shape. A bear cub. For a moment, Tom thought it was dead. It was lying on its side, ribs clearly visible beneath its thin, dirty fur. Its eyes were closed, its paws tucked close to its chest as if trying to hold onto the last scrap of warmth. Then it moved. Barely. Just a twitch of an ear, a feeble breath. But it was enough. The cub was alive. Tom knelt beside it, heart thudding. The animal was no more than 7 or 8 months old, far too young to be alone. Its mother was gone, that much was clear. The cub's eyes fluttered open, dull and glassy, and then, focused. Right on Tom. And what he saw there stopped him cold. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It wasn't the wild, instinctive panic he was used to seeing in herd animals. No, this was something else. It was a plea. Quiet, raw, and desperate. Tom had seen a lot of things in the woods over the years. Predators and prey. Life and death. But this look in the cub's eyes. It felt like someone calling out to him without words. A cry not just to survive, but to be saved. He looked around. The snow was falling harder now, the wind rising. The cub wouldn't last another night out here. Rules or no rules, wild or not, Tom couldn't walk away. He took off his thick canvas jacket, wrapped the cub carefully, and cradled it to his chest. The animal didn't resist. It was too weak. As Tom trudged back uphill toward his cabin, snow stinging his cheeks, he muttered to himself. "You picked the wrong porch, little guy." But even as he said it, something deep inside told him. This cub hadn't picked wrong at all. It had picked him. And nothing in Elk Ridge would ever be the same again. The hunger, the heat, and the first touch of trust. Tom had brought home his share of strays before. A red-tailed hawk with a busted wing. A squirrel kit, orphaned after a windstorm. Even a feral cat that ended up living in his shed for nearly 3 years. But never anything like this. Never a bear. The cub was limp in his arms when he carried it into the cabin, its body barely generating any heat. Tom gently placed it on a thick wool blanket beside the cast iron wood stove, which pulsed with warmth, the fire crackling steadily inside. He knelt down beside it, brushing snow off its fur. The cub's breathing was shallow, its body gaunt beneath the ragged, matted coat. Tom could count its ribs without even touching it. He moved fast but gentle. He poured warm, not hot, water into a metal bowl and mixed in a few spoonfuls of powdered puppy formula he kept in the pantry from a past rescue. He dipped a clean cloth in the mixture, squeezed out the excess, and let a few drops fall onto the cub's lips. No reaction. He tried again. The third time, the cub's tongue flicked out weakly, tasting the liquid. Then again. And again. Tom exhaled. That was something. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was a step in the right direction. He spent the next few hours checking on it constantly. He added small logs to the fire every hour to keep the heat steady. Every couple of hours, he offered more water, more formula. He dampened cloths and wiped the grime from its face and paws. He resisted the urge to talk to it, though every now and then he caught himself muttering things like, "Come on, kid," or "That's it, hang in there." He didn't name it. Not yet. He'd made that mistake before, naming something you might have to let go. Naming something meant acknowledging that you cared. And that could be dangerous. That night, the snow outside thickened into a silent white curtain. The wind rattled the windows, but the little cabin held firm, its walls steeped in decades of warmth and wood smoke. Tom dozed off in his chair beside the fire, still wearing his boots, his eyes locked on the small bundle lying near the stove. When he awoke before dawn, he saw the cub had shifted, its head was raised, if only slightly, and its eyes were open. Not all the way, not alert, but enough to see him. And this time, there was no dull glaze in its gaze. There was a faint awareness. Recognition, even. Tom leaned forward. "Hey there," he said softly. The cub didn't react much, just let out a small huff and closed its eyes again. But it didn't feel like fear. It felt like trust. 3 days passed like that. A quiet routine settled into the cabin. Feedings. Cleaning. Rest. The cub was still too weak to stand, but it would turn its head when Tom entered the room. It started to sniff the air when he approached with food, and it didn't flinch when he reached to stroke its fur. Then, on the 4th day, came the knock. A light tap-tap-tap on the door, followed by the creak of the hinges. "Uncle Tom?" Tom's stomach dropped. He had forgotten. His sisters called the previous week, her voice bright. "Don't forget, Emily's coming up for her winter break. She can't wait to see some real snow." He'd smiled at the time, distracted, thinking the weather would delay things. But there she was. 10 years old, bundled up in a red puffer jacket, her brown hair in 2 braids, snowflakes clinging to her knit hat. Bright eyes, rosy cheeks, a worn backpack slung over one shoulder. Tom met her at the doorway, his body half blocking the room behind him. "Emily," he said, surprised. "You made it." "Yeah. Mom dropped me at the bus stop in Bozeman. It was awesome, everything's white." She grinned and stepped inside, stomping snow off her boots. Then she paused, nose twitching. "What's that smell? Did something burn?" "No," Tom said quickly. Just some stew." His eyes flicked toward the blanket by the stove, barely visible from this angle. But Emily was quick. She set her bag down and took 2 steps forward before Tom could stop her. And then she saw it. The cub. Still curled on the blanket, but alert now, lifting its head slightly at the sound of a new voice. Emily gasped. "Uncle Tom. Is that a—" "Yeah," he said quietly. "A bear cub." She inched closer, mouth open. "It's so small." She crouched down beside it, eyes wide with wonder, her hands resting on her knees. "Is it okay?" Tom nodded. "He's been through a lot. Found him a few days ago in the woods." Emily was silent for a long time. Then, softly, "Can I touch him?" Tom hesitated. He looked at the cub, then back at her. "Gently," he said. "Don't rush it." She reached out slowly, carefully, like she was touching something sacred. Her fingertips brushed the fur on the cub's paw. The cub didn't move. Didn't growl. Didn't pull away. Emily smiled. That big, honest kind of smile kids have when they feel something real. "I think he likes me." Tom chuckled under his breath. "Don't get too close, Em. He's still wild." She turned to him. "Has he got a name?" Tom shook his head. "Didn't seem right." "He's not ours." "Well," Emily said, "I think he needs one anyway." She thought for a moment, then said brightly, "Benny." She looked back at the cub. "You look like a Benny." The cub sniffed the air, then yawned, an open-mouthed stretch of exhaustion and comfort. Emily laughed softly. "I think he agrees." Tom didn't say anything, but deep down, he knew. He'd crossed a line the moment he brought the cub home. And now, Emily had drawn one more, connecting herself to this fragile creature with a name, a smile, and a touch of warmth that had been missing from both their lives for far too long. And in that moment, as the fire flickered and the storm outside howled louder than before, something else settled into the little cabin. Not fear. Not doubt. But a quiet, growing sense of belonging. The days of peace and the breaking of silence. For the next few weeks, the cabin transformed. What once had been a solitary shelter for one became a place of gentle rhythms, wood crackling in the stove, quiet footsteps padding across creaky floorboards, and now, the unmistakable hoofs and snorts of a growing bear cub learning the ways of the indoors. Benny, as Emily called him, without hesitation, without asking permission, was thriving. He still walked with a wobble, and his ribs were still faintly visible under his growing coat, but his eyes were brighter, clearer. He had begun to explore. At first, he only crawled around the blanket near the stove. Then, cautiously, the kitchen, nose sniffing everything from the legs of the dining chair to the worn boots by the door. Tom tried to keep him in a confined space, but Benny didn't seem interested in mischief. He simply wanted warmth, food, and, most of all, Emily. If Emily was in the room, Benny would follow. He'd sit beside her when she colored, crawl into her lap if she sat on the floor. When she read books aloud, he'd tilt his head, listening. When she fell asleep near the fire, he'd curl up nearby, a soft pile of fur in new trust. Tom watched it all with mixed emotions. He wasn't a man who smiled easily, but Emily and Benny brought something back to life in him, a rhythm he hadn't realized he missed. Still, he knew it couldn't last. "Don't get too close," he warned Emily one evening as she fed Benny bits of apple from her palm. "He's still a wild animal." Emily didn't look up. "He's not wild anymore. He's family." Tom sighed, gazing into the fire. "That's the problem, kid." But he didn't stop her. And when she curled up beside the cub that night with her blanket, Tom didn't have the heart to separate them. Outside, winter showed no signs of easing. But inside the cabin, life found its rhythm. Emily documented everything in her sketchbook. She drew Benny playing with a pine cone, Benny sniffing the window, Benny asleep with one paw over his face. She wrote little captions beneath the drawings. "Benny learns what peanut butter is." "Benny doesn't like snow in his ears." "Benny thinks he's a dog." Tom couldn't help but chuckle at that one. It wasn't far off. But peace doesn't last long in small towns. Secrets don't stay hidden, especially the kind with 4 paws and a growing appetite. It happened on a Thursday. The sky had cleared, and Emily convinced Tom to let Benny play outside, just for a few minutes. Tom set up a small enclosure in the backyard using firewood, crates, and some old fencing. Benny bounded through the snow clumsily, rolling over himself, throwing up powder with every clumsy lunge. Emily laughed, filming him with her mom's old camcorder. It felt like joy. It felt like freedom. Until a neighbor spotted them. Sarah Reed, who lived 2 cabins down the ridge, had taken her dog out for a walk. The barking started first, sharp, frantic. Then came the scream. "Tom! Is that a bear?" Tom rushed outside, Emily close behind. Sarah stood frozen at the edge of the woods, clutching her dog's leash. Her face was pale. Her eyes locked on Benny, who had stopped mid-snow roll and was now staring at her, just as startled. Tom raised his hands. "He's okay. He's not dangerous." Sarah didn't seem to hear. She backed away slowly, her breath coming in puffs. Then she turned and ran, dragging her dog behind her. Emily looked up at Tom, confused. Why is she scared? Benny didn't do anything. Tom said nothing. He knew what was coming. By the next morning, the phones were ringing. First, a call from Jerry, the postman. Then from Denny at the general store. Then from the sheriff's office. It didn't take long. The rumors spread like wildfire. Tom Walker's keeping a bear in his house. He's got a wild animal around a child. What if it attacks someone? What's he thinking? Tom didn't blame them. Not really. Most folks in Elk Ridge had grown up knowing better than to mess with wildlife. They'd heard the horror stories, the accidents, the news headlines. They weren't cruel. They were scared. Emily overheard some of the voicemails. She sat at the table, arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyes shining with angry tears. They don't know him, she said bitterly. They don't know anything. Tom knelt beside her. They don't, he agreed. But they're not entirely wrong either. She looked up at him, voice cracking. But he's not dangerous. He's just Benny. Tom looked toward the cub, who lay sleeping by the fire, unaware of the storm brewing outside. And he felt the weight settle on his shoulders. Something had to give. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Tom sat alone on the porch. The stars were out, sharp and cold in the black sky. He held a cup of coffee, untouched, cooling quickly in the air. Benny was growing. His legs were sturdier, his paws bigger. He was still gentle, but instinct doesn't ask permission. What if he got startled one day? What if he swiped too hard with a paw? What if he got loose in town? Tom thought about the girl sleeping in his spare bedroom, about the sketches on her wall, about the way she laughed when Benny licked her mitten. He thought about the townsfolk, people he'd known for years, now whispering behind closed doors. And he knew. The silence was broken. The town knew. And now, he had a choice to make. Inside the cabin, Benny stirred, letting out a soft grunt. Tom turned and looked through the frosted window. The cub stretched, then settled again beside the fire. For now, things were calm. But the snow was beginning to melt. And time was running out. Letting go to hold on. The letter came 3 days later. Official. Typed. Stamped by the Montana Wildlife Department. Tom opened it at the kitchen table, the morning sun barely breaking through the clouds outside. Emily sat nearby, chewing her cereal in silence, watching him with eyes too old for her age. He read the letter once. Then twice. Then folded it, set it aside, and said nothing. Emily didn't ask, she didn't have to. She could read his face like a book. She knew. The wildlife officers were coming in 5 days. They were sending a transport crate, a vet, and 2 field agents. They were polite but firm. Keeping a bear cub, no matter how gentle, is against the law. Relocation to a protected facility is mandatory. Refusal to comply will result in legal consequences. Tom couldn't argue. He wouldn't. He had always respected the land and its rules. But his heart didn't understand what the law was asking of him now. That afternoon, he found Emily outside with Benny. The snow was melting, just a little, forming soft puddles and slush along the cabin path. Benny was lumbering through the wet ground like a toddler with 2 big shoes, chasing after a stick Emily kept tossing just far enough. She laughed. Not like before. Not full of joy. But like she was trying to hold onto something slipping away. Tom stood by the door and watched them. When Emily finally noticed him, she ran over. Her coat was muddy, her braids undone, her gloves soaked. He's better now, she said quickly. He's strong. He can walk. He eats by himself. Maybe we don't have to tell anyone yet. Tom knelt down, putting both hands on her shoulders. I already did, Em. They're coming. Her eyes filled instantly. No. No, you can call them back. Say he ran away. Say he went into the woods. I won't lie, he said gently. And I won't let them come take him without saying goodbye. Emily clenched her fists. It's not fair. He didn't do anything wrong. I know. Then why are they taking him? Tom didn't answer. Because what could he say? That life isn't fair? That laws don't care about what your heart says? That love, sometimes, means letting go? The next few days were a blur of quiet preparations. Emily stopped drawing. She stopped reading. She only sat by Benny's side, curled in a blanket, stroking his fur. Benny, for his part, didn't understand. He had no idea the world outside the cabin was changing. He simply enjoyed the warmth, the food, the soft voice of the girl who whispered to him every night. Tom built a temporary crate from old barnwood to help with transport, hoping it would feel less cold than the metal one the Rangers would bring. He didn't sleep much. He wandered the house at night, remembering the sound of paws on the floor, the low grunts when Benny got impatient for breakfast, the way Emily lit up every time the cub learned something new. He had raised wild things before. He had returned them to the woods, and he had never looked back. But this was different. This was family. The night before the Rangers were scheduled to arrive, Tom found Emily sitting by the fire, Benny curled against her legs. The cub had grown so much. His face had filled out, his eyes were bright and alert, his coat thick and shining with health. He was no longer a fragile scrap of fur found in the snow. He was becoming a bear. Emily held something in her hands. A small, knitted ring, looped yarn in forest green and deep brown. She'd made it from old yarn scraps, a quiet project done in the evenings without telling anyone. She slipped it around Benny's neck like a collar. "What's that?" Tom asked softly. "It's not a leash," she said, defensive. "It's a reminder." He nodded. "A good one." She didn't cry. Not yet. But Tom could see it in the way her lips trembled and the way her fingers kept curling into fists in her lap. That night, she didn't sleep in her bed. She lay next to Benny on the rug by the stove, her arm draped across his back. The bear didn't move once. Morning came too fast. The knock on the door was sharp. 3 times. Authoritative. Tom opened it to find 2 officers and a veterinarian, bundled in regulation green, their boots caked in snow. They were kind. Professional. Apologetic in the way people are when they know they're ruining something good but can't stop it. Emily stood behind Tom, small and silent. Benny, now nearly 40 pounds, stood beside her. He didn't growl. He didn't run. He simply looked up, blinking, as if waiting for instructions. The vet knelt down, spoke softly, offered him a treat. Benny sniffed it. Took it. Emily stepped forward, holding her hand out. "Wait," she said. Everyone froze. She knelt beside Benny and cupped his face. "You remember me, okay? Even if they change your name. Even if they don't let you sleep near fires. You remember I loved you. You remember I was yours." Benny let out a soft chuff and pressed his head into her chest. And that was when she cried. Not loud. Not wild. Just the slow, quiet tears of a child losing something they never expected to find in the first place. Tom turned away, blinking hard. They loaded Benny gently into the transport crate. The officers promised updates, said he'd be taken to a wildlife sanctuary 2 hours north, a place with trees and open space and other cubs. They said he'd be safe. They said it like it mattered. As the truck rumbled down the snowy path, Emily stood on the porch, her arms wrapped around herself, watching until the taillights disappeared into the wide horizon. Tom stood beside her, silent. After a while, she spoke. "I thought he needed me. But I think I needed him more." Tom put an arm around her. "I think you both needed each other." And though the cabin felt emptier than it had in weeks, it also felt filled. With the kind of love that leaves a mark, even after it's gone. The spring that brought him back. Winter melted slowly in Elk Ridge. Snow gave way to slush, then mud, then the soft green of budding pine needles and early wildflowers. Birdsong returned to the mornings. Creeks rushed louder with thawed snow. And the mountains, once cloaked in white silence, breathed again. But inside Tom's cabin, the stillness lingered. Benny was gone. The rug by the fire remained, but it was empty now. Emily's drawings still covered the fridge, Benny chewing on boots, Benny chasing pine cones, but they were fading in color, curling at the edges. Her sketchbook lay untouched on the table. Her markers, dried out. She didn't want to draw anymore. It had been 6 weeks. Long enough, by some measures, to move on. But not for Emily. Each morning, she still checked the porch. Each night, she glanced at the corner where Benny used to sleep. When Tom asked if she wanted to go into town for ice cream, or to visit the general store, she'd shake her head. He might come back, she'd say. Tom didn't have the heart to argue. Because truth be told, he looked, too. Every time he walked into the woods. Every time he saw a shadow move just beyond the tree line. He listened for that soft chuff, the unmistakable sound of a curious cub. But nothing came. Then, one warm afternoon in late April, the phone rang. It was the sanctuary. A woman named Gwen, the lead caregiver for rescued cubs, said Benny was thriving. He'd bonded with another young male, a spring orphan named Jasper. He'd grown nearly twice his size, and had a healthy appetite, a playful temperament, and, most surprisingly, a deep connection to humans. We're organizing a family day, Gwen said, for anyone who helped with our rescues this season. Emily and Tom, would you like to visit? Tom glanced at Emily, who was at the window sketching tree branches for the first time in over a month. He covered the receiver. You want to go see him? Her head turned slowly. Eyes wide. You mean Benny? He nodded. They say he remembers people. She didn't answer, just ran to her room to pack. The sanctuary was 2 hours north of Elk Ridge, tucked into the mountains between 2 ridges where the trees grew thick and the air smelled like sap and spring water. Fenced enclosures sprawled across the landscape, filled with boulders, streams, logs, and meadows where cubs roamed freely but safely. Tom and Emily arrived just before noon. Families milled about, volunteers gave tours, and staff in green jackets handed out pamphlets and cookies. Gwen greeted them near the entrance, a tall woman in her 50s with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes. You must be Benny's family, she smiled. Emily nodded shyly. Tom shook her hand. He's out in enclosure B, Gwen said, pointing down a dirt path. Biggest one we've got. He's doing wonderfully. They walked the winding trail, Gwen leading the way, explaining the sanctuary's work as they passed other cubs playing or napping in the sun. Most of these bears will be re-wilded in the fall, Gwen explained. We try not to let them get too attached to humans. But Benny, well, he was different from day one. She paused by a wooden viewing deck, gesturing toward the large clearing below. There he is. At first, Emily couldn't see him. Then, a brown shape emerged from behind a fallen tree, larger than before, stronger, his coat glossy and thick. Benny. He sniffed the air, padded toward a patch of grass, then flopped down on his belly, rolling lazily as he batted at a pine cone. Just like he used to. Emily's breath caught in her throat. That's him, she whispered. He's bigger. But that's him. Tom rested a hand on her shoulder. You want to say hi? Gwen smiled. He might not come close. We've been easing them away from human contact lately. But you're welcome to try. Emily stepped forward to the edge of the viewing deck. The wind caught her hair. She cupped her hands around her mouth. Benny! The bear looked up. His ears perked. He stood still. She called again. Benny! It's me! Emily! He didn't move. For a moment, the silence pressed in hard. Too long had passed. Too much had changed. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he began to walk. Not toward the sanctuary staff. Not toward the other cubs. Toward her. Step by heavy step, he crossed the clearing. He stopped a few feet from the fence, close to the viewing platform. Then, standing upright on his hind legs, he raised one paw. And waved. Emily gasped. Tom's heart dropped. It wasn't a wild gesture. It was an instinct. It was Benny. The same bear cub who used to mimic Emily's bedtime routine, who had learned to wave when she clapped, who used to lean into her hand as she read him fairy tales by firelight. She leaned over the railing, tears streaming freely now. "I missed you," she whispered. "I missed you every single day." Benny dropped back down on all fours, padded a few steps closer to the fence, then lay down, resting his head on his paws, his gaze never leaving hers. For 15 quiet minutes, they stayed like that. Girl and bear. No words. No movement. Just presence. Gwen stood quietly beside Tom, her voice soft. "That doesn't happen often." "Almost never." Tom nodded. "Yeah. He always was special." They didn't stay long. Emily didn't try to touch Benny, she knew better now. But she did whisper a few more words before they turned to go. "Thank you for finding me," she said. "Even if we only had a little while, you made everything better." Benny watched them walk away. He didn't follow. He didn't cry out. But just before they rounded the bend, he stood once more and raised his paw again. Emily turned and waved back. The drive home was quiet, peaceful. No more tears. Just a full heart. Tom looked over at Emily, curled up in the passenger seat with her sketchbook on her lap. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She held it up. It was Benny, waving, framed by pine trees and sky. Below it, in careful block letters, she had written, "I thought I saved Benny. But maybe, he saved me too." Tom smiled. And somewhere deep in the mountains behind them, a bear cub, no longer starving, no longer alone, rested in the spring sun. Remembering a warm cabin, a kind voice, and the little girl who once called him family. Sometimes, life sends us unexpected visitors, a starving cub on a porch, a child learning how to say goodbye, a moment that cracks the stillness and lets something warm in. Benny wasn't just a bear. He was a mirror, a lesson, and a gift. He reminded us that compassion doesn't always follow rules, it follows the heart. He showed us that connection can bloom between species, between silence and laughter, between the wild and the waiting. And most of all, he taught us that letting go isn't the end, it's a form of love, maybe the purest one there is. In our own lives, we all have a Benny moment, when we must choose to protect something fragile, even when it hurts. A time to open our homes, or our hearts. A time to walk away, so something else can grow. At Paw Prints and Stories, we believe these tales, real, raw, and filled with quiet magic, help us stay connected to what matters. If Benny's journey moved you, imagine how many other stories are waiting to be told. So here's our quiet challenge to you. What would you do if compassion knocked on your door in the form of a starving cub? Would you turn away, or make room beside the fire? The next story may already be on its way. We'll be here to tell it, one paw print at a time.